Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear all students, welcome to the next lecture of histotechniques. This lecture is about the remaining part of the processing of the tissue. In this lecture, we will discuss about the infiltration and embedding of the tissue in the molten paraffin wax, and we will also discuss about the qualities of ideal impregnating medium and the different possible impregnating medium and the impregnation of embedding medium, their summary. We will also discuss about the manual and automated type of tissue processing and their machines, and in the last we will discuss about the troubleshooting in tissue processing. So, the infiltration and embedding is the third step in the tissue processing. After clearing, the tissue spaces are now infiltrated with the embedding medium because dead spaces must be filled, otherwise the tissue may cause shrinkage and their structure are deformed. So, therefore, this embedding medium is important. The clearing agent within the tissue that is removed by the process of diffusion. So, for embedding purpose, molten paraffin wax is most commonly used throughout the world in almost all the histopathology lab, and after cooling in a room temperature, the molten wax is solidified to provide support for cutting into thin section with the help of microtome. The time and the number of changes that is required for the impregnation of the tissue. This time and number of changes depends on few factors. The first one of them is the size of the tissue. So, if the tissue size is thicker and larger, then this tissue will take more time, and this tissue will also contain more clearing agent to remove. That is why the size of the tissue matters in case of the time and number of changes in the infiltration and embedding medium. And the type of tissue. The hard tissues, for example the bone, the cartilage, these hard tissue will take more time for embedding than the soft tissues. The third factor is the clearing agent, type of clearing agent. If the clearing agent is xylene and toluene, so these clearing agent can be easily removed from the tissue. If cedarwood oil is used, as cedarwood oil is more viscous and dense than xylene and toluene, so cedarwood oil will take more time and it will need more changes than the xylene and toluene. And the type of processing also matters. So, if there is a production of vacuum, so this vacuum embedding, this enhances the impregnation of the wax within the tissue. But if the vacuum is not present, so the impregnation will take more time in a non-vacuum embedding situation. Now, what should be the qualities of an ideal impregnating medium? The first quality of an ideal impregnating medium that it should be miscible with the clearing agent, because this impregnation process is completed with the help of diffusion. So therefore, for that diffusion purpose, this solubility of the embedding medium with the clearing agent is important. If liquid in higher temperature and solid in room temperature, the embedding medium, it must have the variety and the qualities that it should be liquid at higher temperature, that is 55 or 60 degree centigrade, and if it is cooled down to room temperature, then it may become solidified. So this quality must also be present in a good ideal impregnating medium. The impregnating medium should be homogeneous and stable, because if it is put into a tissue for the impregnation and embedding, then the homogeneous solution, the homogeneous medium, it will give clear picture and there will be no obstruction during the staining process. So for that purpose, a homogeneous impregnating medium is important, and the stability of the impregnating medium is also important, because it must not react with the antigens, with the ions, with the charges that is present within the tissues, so that the tissue structure may not be disturbed. The ideal impregnating medium, it should be non-toxic, non-corrosive to the person who is working with this, and it should be cheap. The cost effectivity is also important factor in every aspect regarding the labs and the processing of the tissues. And this impregnating medium should be transparent, because if there is certain chemicals which hinders the transparency, which disturbs the transparency of the tissue of the embedding medium, so this will create problem during the microscopy. So transparency is also important for ideal impregnating medium, and this impregnating medium should be fit for sectioning of the tissue, because in microtomy small sections will be cut and small slices of the tissue will be performed with the help of microtome. So for that purpose, the ideal impregnating medium should be fit, and it must be cut down into a smaller sizes of 3 to 5 micrometer with the help of microtome. The impregnating medium is the paraffin wax. It is the ideal impregnating medium that is used in the labs. This paraffin wax is basically a hydrocarbon, and this is produced as a byproduct during refining of the petroleum. So the crude petroleum is processed and it is refined, and as a result of that refining we get this paraffin wax, and this is the most popular universally accepted embedding medium for tissue processing. As we have already discussed, that this is non-toxic and inexpensive, cheap medium, so this is also a factor that paraffin wax is used. The melting point of paraffin wax, this varies from 39 to 70 degree centigrade. So there are different types of paraffin wax which is available in the market, and having variety of the melting point. So this is also a good quality of the paraffin wax, that it have different there are different qualities of paraffin wax is available. So depending on the area, depending on the locality, different types of paraffin wax can be used for the impregnation and for the embedding of the tissues. The advantages of paraffin wax is the tissue block can be stored, which is embedded with the paraffin wax for longer time, and this is non-toxic, this is cheap and safe. But the disadvantage is, the issue with the paraffin wax that if the tissue is impregnated for prolonged time, then this causes the shrinkage of the tissue as well as the hardening of the tissue. And in certain cases, for example in case of bone, in case of cartilage, in case of eye, this impregnation takes longer time than the other tissues. So these are the disadvantages of paraffin wax as an impregnating medium. This is the summary of the impregnation. So the aim of the embedding and impregnation to provide support to the tissue, and the principle is the clearing agent is removed by the process of diffusion and the tissue space is infiltrated with the embedding medium. So as we have discussed in the previous slides, that the ideal impregnation medium should be miscible with the clearing agent, should be liquid at the higher and solid at the room temperature. This impregnating medium should be homogeneous and stable. It should be non-toxic and cheap. It should be transparent and fit for sectioning of the tissues. And the time for the impregnating of embedding medium, it depends on the size of the tissues and the type of the tissue, the type of the clearing agent and the type of processing. So larger tissues, they need more time as compared to smaller tissue, and also harder tissues, they takes more time than the softer tissue. Cedarwood takes more time as compared to xylene and toluene, when these xylene and toluene are used as a clearing agent. So, and the vacuum processing accelerates the duration, the time of embedding. So this is the summary of the impregnating of embedding medium. This is the routine tissue processing. Their image that the dehydration is, first the tissue is put into 70% ethanol for 1 hour, then it is changed into 90% ethanol, the first change for 2 hours and the second 90% ethanol for 2 hours, then a pure alcohol ethanol 2 changes for 2 hours. After that, the clearing agent, that is xylene, for 1 hour and the second change of xylene for 1 hour. And this wax impregnation, first change is for 2 hours and the second change is also for 2 hours. So this is a general picture of the routine tissue processing. Now let's discuss the different methods which is performed for the processing of the tissues. The tissue processing can be performed by manual method or by the automated tissue processor. Different types of tissue processor are available and these are widely used, and they are automated systems, and they changes the tissue from one jar to another jar when they are being set and the program is fitted in that machines. The principle of automated tissue processor is to transfer the tissue in different fluid for a specific period of time, in a specific and desired environment. So there are two types of tissue processor. First one is a tissue transfer processor and the second one is fluid transfer processor. This is the image of the automated tissue transfer processor. In this machine, in this instrument, a bucket of tissue is transferred from one container to another container after a specific time. And there are multiple containers in which different reagents along having a specific environment are being present in these jars, in these buckets. The basket in which tissue is present, it is immersed in the specific container for a specific time, just as we discussed in the previous slide that for embedding, for fixation and for dehydration we have one jar of 70% ethanol, then 2 changes of 90% and 2 changes of absolute alcohol. So then the 2 changes of xylene and 2 changes of the paraffin wax. Then transferred to the next container automatically after the specific time period is over. So along with this transferring, a gentle agitation is also created by vertical swinging or rotary movement of the tissue basket within these jars. This helps in the accelerated tissue processing. The time schedule and transfer of tissue in each container is determined by a microprocessor which is installed in the machine. This is the next type of tissue processor and this is a fluid transfer processor. In this machine, the tissue is fixed but the fluid changes, while in the previous one the fluid were fixed and the tissue were changed and transferred from one jar to another jar. This is a completely closed system and the tissue is kept in the container which is filled with a specific fluid. After a specific period of time, the fluid is pumped out from that container which have the tissue, and the same container is then filled with the next type of fluid for the next step. And in this processor, each step can be customized for vacuum, for temperature and for time duration. The advantages of this fluid transfer processor over the tissue transfer processor is that the vacuum pressure makes the system faster and efficient, and there is no chance of tissue drying in this processor. So these are the advantages of the fluid transfer over the tissue transfer processor. So if tissue processing is performed manually, but this system is rarely used in the routine laboratory in which there is less quantity of the samples or in case of emergency. The advantages of manual tissue processing is that the small number of sample can be processed in a small laboratory, so no need to buy a costly machineries. Second, careful monitoring is possible in each step if there is any delicate tissue, so we can monitor easily and carefully with the manual processing. In case of emergency when automated tissue processor is not working, we can perform manual tissue processing, and it is possible to select the reagent of choice with the flexibility in time duration. that we can put the tissue in a reagent with we can increase their time or we can decrease their time depending on the type of tissue. So these are the advantages of manual tissue processing. The disadvantages of manual tissue processing is it is very inconvenient to process tissue every day in this manual step, and the second is that it is very laborious procedure and it takes longer time to process the tissue manually. What are the precautions during the tissue processing? So the first one is the bulk of the tissue should be optimum for adequate penetration of the fluid, that there should be a specific amount of tissue which is suitable for the fluid that is present in the jar, because if we put high quantity of the tissue and they are excess then in the fluid that is in the jar, so the tissue processing may not be completed and the tissue may become improper processed. The amount of fluid should be adequate and the fluid level should be higher than the tissue level. The tissue basket and the cassette should be clean and there should be no spoilage of wax. The temperature of the infiltrating medium should be optimum, and it is preferable to keep the temperature slightly higher than the melting point so that the tissue become completely, the wax become completely melted and it is easy to put the wax in the tissue for the embedding process. There should be a proper record of the change of fluid, the number of tissues processed and the paraffin used and all other errors that comes during the process of the tissue processing. The troubleshooting in tissue processing is the different problems that comes during the processing of the tissue. The first problem is the tissue become soft during embedding. The cause of this issue is the tissue is too thick and it is now sliced during grossing. The second cause of this softening during embedding is that the reagents are saturated with the water and these reagents are not changed at a long time. And the third issue is that the paraffin is saturated with clearing agent, that is xylene. So to solve this issue, the tissue should be cut properly during the grossing. The reagent should be changed at a specific and proper time, and the paraffin should be also changed so that it may not be saturated with the clearing agent. The second issue is the tissue is coming out from the block during sectioning. So this issue is caused by the dehydration process that is inadequate. So due to this water, the paraffin is not properly infiltrated in the tissue. This issue is solved by changing the processing program and giving the specific and adequate time for the dehydration. The next problem is the micro chattering effect around the edges of the tissue section. This problems is created when the tissue is dehydrated more than the required time, and to solve that issue, change the dehydration time, it is better to process the smaller biopsy tissue separately from the larger tissue to have proper dehydration. And cracked and folded tissue section, this problem is created by excessive dehydration. So to solve that problem, the block is soaked with a wet gauze piece before sectioning. And the irregular staining of the tissue, this is also caused by the dehydration process, that is suboptimum, and the water is present within the tissue. So this problem is resolved by changing the processing program and give adequate time for the dehydration, and the tissue becomes brittle. And after processing, this is the last problem, and this is also caused by the excessive blood in the tissue. So to clear the problem, to resolve this problem, apply a gauze piece which is soaked with warm water on the surface of the block before sectioning. That was all for the tissue processing, their different chemicals and their troubleshooting. Hope you have learned about the tissue processing. If you have any question, you can ask in the question box. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.